This happened a long time ago. At the time, I was living alone in a first-floor apartment. My girlfriend had been sick at the time and ended up in the hospital dealing with a rare disease. She recovered fine from it, but during those weeks, my life was pretty much go to work, go to the hospital to be with her, come back to the house for dinner, and then bed. It was a Friday night and I was alone, so I decided to distract myself by reading and watching some videos on YouTube. Hours passed, and at 3 a.m., I was in bed with my iPad in hand, almost falling asleep. Then I heard it. I knew that sound pretty well. You see, outside, right in front of my bedroom door, there was a long corridor that leads directly to the kitchen. This apartment was in a building built in the 50s, and the kitchen door was old and had become slightly bent. That meant that whenever you turned the doorknob to open the door, it would snap out of its place with a distinct clack sound. That was the sound I had just heard. A lot of thoughts ran through my mind in that moment. Had I dreamt it in my semi-sleeping state? Or maybe the sound was real, but what happened was that the doorknob internal mechanism broke and it opened by itself. Or, of course, maybe someone was in my house and they had just opened the door. At this point, my heart was racing and I started considering my options. I had a broomstick next to my bed. You may ask why I had it there, and to be honest, I had it exactly because I lived alone and thought that one day I might be in a situation like this where I would need a weapon. My girlfriend even used to joke about it, but I guess that my paranoia was now paying off in the most unfortunate of situations. So I decided I was going to take this stick on one hand and grab my cell phone on the other. I would open my bedroom door while calling 911, and if no one else was in the apartment, I would just apologize to the operator on the other end of the line and explain the situation. However, back in those days, my cell phone wasn't yet a smartphone, and it had this feature I found interesting, even though I never used it. If you press on a couple of specific keys, it would start ringing like somebody was calling you. It was meant to be used when you wanted to simulate that you were getting a call to get out of a boring conversation or a tough situation. Clumsily, I pressed the keys and the phone started ringing. I quickly shut it up, but it now became clear inside the apartment that I was awake. If someone was outside my bedroom, they certainly heard it. What was going to happen? I stopped for a few seconds to hear my surroundings. Nothing. It was dead quiet. I decided to continue with my plan. I dialed 911 with one hand, raised the broomstick with the other, and quickly opened the door. As soon as I did that, someone sprinted in front of me in the corridor and quickly got into the kitchen, closing the door behind them. I screamed, "Hey!" and started pursuing, but a split second later, I thought, stop. What if there's someone else in the apartment? What if another intruder sneaks up on you from behind? In front of me was the corridor to the kitchen, but on my left was another corridor that led to the living room and office. The office had the light on, so the intruder had been there, but I didn't know if he had company. I took a step back into the entrance of my room so that I wouldn't be caught off guard.
Sir, are you there?
The 911 operator was calling me on the phone. I quickly explained to him what was happening. I gave him my address, and he told me the police were on its way. They had a patrol car nearby, so I should just wait. Then he hung up. The apartment was dead silent. I was terrified. There were only 3 things that I had been able to notice in the intruder. He had a light-colored sweatshirt with horizontal black lines, dark hair, and he smelled really bad. In fact, the smell was still in the apartment, and I could still sense it. The police arrived after 7 or 8 minutes, which felt like ages. The apartment door was next to the bedroom, so I managed to quickly approach it and unlock the door to let them in. I explained what happened to the police, and they said that we should go through the whole apartment and check every single hiding place. They had seen situations before where a burglar had hidden himself for a long period, even after the house owners had called the police, to later attack them. The apartment wasn't that big, so it was easy to conclude that no one else was hiding there. In the kitchen, it was obvious what happened. It had these large windows that faced the back of the building, where we had a small community garden. I had left one of the windows open, and next to it, on the outside, there was a large drain pipe along the wall. The intruder used that pipe to climb up to my window and get in. The police left to go look around the neighborhood for someone matching the description of the sweatshirt I described. While they were gone, I could still smell that horrible odor the intruder had left in the apartment. After around 20 minutes, they came back. They couldn't find anyone. The burglar was long gone. Luckily, he didn't have the chance to steal anything while he was in my apartment, but the audacity. He must have seen the light on in my bedroom through the edges of the door, and still he tried walking past to steal something from the office. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I went to the garden in the back to try to find any further clues about the intruder, but I couldn't find anything. A neighbor in the building next door was at the window, and I called out to her. I told her what happened. She just smiled and said, "Well, welcome to the neighborhood. We all have stories like that in this place. You should never leave your windows open, and maybe you should consider getting some bars to protect them." The next day, I bought a motion alarm and installed it in the kitchen. I never had another experience like that in the apartment, but, to be honest, I never slept the same way in that bedroom, traumatized by those events. At night, I would fear hearing again the sound of the kitchen door snapping out of its place. A few years later, I moved out to a larger apartment in another neighborhood. This time, it was on a 7th floor, so much harder for intruders to get in through the windows. So, to the intruder that came to my apartment and smelled really bad, let's not meet ever again. So, just as some background, I am a male and currently 25 and still living within 15 miles of my old house. This happened when I was around 8 or 9, making my sister at the time 5 or 6. We lived in a quiet neighborhood that, once I grew up, I found was actually a lower income part of town. However, we had some wonderful neighbors, and it was thanks to these neighbors that a lot of potentially negative situations were avoided. At the time, my dad was working an 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. job, and my mother was a secretary at a hospital, which meant that during the day, she was often at work. Usually my sister and I had a babysitter, but once I reached about 8 or 9, I began to be old enough to look out for us without a babysitter. Now, mind you, this was the 90s, which certainly were not safe, but were much safer than they are now. Also, we had the previously mentioned neighbors who generally did a good job of keeping an eye on us and our house. This particular incident was one of the first times I was charged to babysit my sister. She was in her high chair eating whatever my mom had left for us when I got a knock on our front door. Now, this was strange since we never got visitors on a regular basis, other than the boy across the street who would want us to come out and play, but he usually just yelled my name while knocking. I was young and naive and decided to open the door. There was a locked screen door beyond that. I left that closed and locked. Outside was a middle-aged man. I hardly remember his facial features or even body type. I remember his yellow shirt and dirty jeans. "Can I help you?" I asked innocently. No alarm bells going off yet.
Hey there, are your parents home?
All right, first alarm bell. My parents teaching me not to trust strangers rushed through my head, but I still didn't quite fully grasp the potential danger here. "My mom went to the store. She'll be back any minute." Weird half lie. I could have said that she was here, but in the shower, or that she was lying down upstairs. I'm glad that I didn't tell him that she wouldn't be back for quite a few hours, but looking back, it's scary how naive I was.
Well, that's no problem. Hey, so look, my dog went missing, and I think it went into your backyard. Do you mind if I come in and we can go check it out?
Okay, so I may have been dumb, but I wasn't that dumb. There was no way in hell I was letting this stranger into my house, especially with my sister there. She was my first thought. Sure, I didn't want to have any harm fall on me, but she was my sister, and it was my job to keep her safe. I should have closed the door right then and there, but once again, I went with a less safe, but still not totally stupid route. Well, the gate should be unlocked. If you want to go check in the backyard, you can, and promptly closed the door. Now, of course, I was very curious if there was a stray dog in my backyard. Dogs are great. Even with the weird guy being around, I was pretty interested to see how his search in the backyard went. So I decided to check the back window and see if there was actually a dog, and if so, if the man would catch it. Now, at this point, I'm sure that you figured out that there was no dog, and when I looked out the back window, I could see almost the entire yard, including the gate. The man wasn't there. This was mere seconds after I had closed the door on him. I waited for a few minutes, but he never showed up. After about 5 minutes, there was another knock on my door. This time I was much more wary, and I didn't like this guy showing up. I was pretty tired of the whole ordeal, but I still hadn't fully grasped the situation. I kept the chain lock on the door and cracked it open. "Did you find your dog?" Again, I can't remember his facial features, so I really cannot recall his expression, but I remember his tone was a bit desperate, as well as annoyed.
No, I looked all over the yard, and I couldn't find him. I have a picture in my car if you want to take it, just in case you see him.
Nope, no more. I still didn't understand abduction, but I certainly wasn't going to go anywhere outside of the house with this stranger. I told him that he can leave a picture in the mailbox and we will keep an eye out, once again promptly closing the door. What followed is really what creeps me out to this day. Looking back, I was freaked out that I had come that close to exposing my sister and myself to danger, but this scared the shit out of me. Suddenly, there was more knocking on my door. Not the screen door separating the door itself. Like I mentioned previously, the screen door was locked, and unless that was open, it was impossible to knock on the door itself. It freaked me the fuck out, and I took my sister to my bedroom and crept back out to the kitchen, where I could see out into the front yard, and I saw the man quickly getting back into his car, while my saint of a next-door neighbor, Joan, stood on her front lawn, smoking and watching him intently. It took a long time for me to add it all up, and honestly, I had forgotten about it for a long time. When I finally remembered it all, I couldn't even believe my own memories. I'm still debating with myself to actually tell my parents now. I wouldn't want to unnecessarily upset them, but maybe it's an important story to tell my 2 younger sisters, one of whom is getting married soon, just as a life lesson. If anyone has any advice, I would love to hear it. Either way, Mr. Yellow Shirt Man, yeah, let's not meet ever again. Also, thank you, Joan, wherever you are. You saved me on multiple occasions, and I didn't even know it. Edit. I forgot to mention this. It turns out he had ripped a corner of the screen door and had unlocked the screen door that way. My dad later just thought it was wear and tear, or us kids being kids. But yeah, I forgot to mention that portion. Pretty creepy, looking back on it. This happened about 10 years ago, but still creeps me out when I think about it. At the time, I was an 18-year-old female, living in a more crime-prone area of downtown Savannah, Georgia, with my older sister, then 20 female. We lived together in this super old, decrepit house and both worked at a nearby club. Not that it's super relevant, but we were both exotic dancers at the time, so our work hours were odd, 7 p.m. to 2 a.m., later or earlier depending on the night. Her boyfriend who had been living there was in jail at the time. I know, we were real winners back then, LOL. Generally, we would both work the same shifts. On this particular evening, I was tired and I didn't feel like going in, so she went without me. We didn't really have internet or cable, just DVDs and my cell phone, so I would frequently spend my nights on the porch listening to music and smoking a few cigarettes. It was starting to get late, maybe 10 to 11 p.m., and I noticed a figure in the distance coming up the sidewalk. I didn't think much of it. A lot of people walk everywhere downtown, and we had a pretty large homeless population. But then I noticed he seemingly noticed me and crossed the street to the sidewalk that ran in front of my house. I didn't budge. I wasn't scared of much back then. I had seen a lot of crazy shit, so an unassuming man approaching at night didn't bother me in the slightest. As he got closer, I could see that he was a dirty, older gentleman, likely homeless. I stared down at my phone. A few seconds later, I looked up, and that's when I saw him, a few feet away from me, on my porch, just standing there, staring at me. I got a chill down my spine. I didn't want to threaten the guy and potentially escalate the situation, so instead I just say, "Hey man, what's up?" He immediately started talking faster than my brain could keep up. I assumed the guy was sacked out of his mind on drugs or something. I had no clue what he was saying, but a few words were clear. Hey baby, hang out, fine, stupid bitch, kill. I froze. I decided to try and play it cool by asking the guy if he wanted a cigarette. He nodded, and I slowly got up to pass him to get to my front door. I explained to him that they were inside, and he would have to leave after I gave him one, as my sister's boyfriend was home, and I'd get in trouble for having people over to their house without permission. He seemingly accepted that. I handed him a cigarette and went to close the door. Something told me to hurry, and so I did. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I looked through the peephole and saw him feeling in his pockets like he was looking for something. I could hear him mumbling gibberish and cursing while trying to open my door. I panicked. I ran to the back door to let our 3 large dogs in, a Rottweiler and 2 pit bulls. They're sweet, but very loud and scary sounding if you don't know them. Their barking seemed enough to scare him away. I called my sister over and over until she picked up. I was freaking out, explaining what happened. She told me to lock all the doors and she would be home in a few hours. Hindsight, I wish I had called the police, as I was terrified of the rest of the night, and every sound startled me, even after my sister got home. I never saw the man again, and I stopped sitting outside alone at night. A week later, down the street from us, a young girl, early teens, was drugged into an alley while waiting for the city bus, and was drugged, beaten, and SA'd. I still don't know what came of that. They never caught the guy. I called and reported what happened to me. I still wonder what would have happened to me had I not gone inside. Shortly after, we moved away and got different jobs.